So I want to go back to my PowerPoint to be a little bit academic about it.
So Dietrich, just one moment. The sound is a bit choppy at times, so just be prepared that I might stop you. I give you 5 minutes,
Okay.
and then I might have to
Okay.
stop you, and then we'll do something about that.
Okay, you can also lift your hand up, then I know that there is a problem. Yeah.
Hold on.
Okay, so just a little review. Yeah, retroviruses are kind of tricky, evil things that use different tricks to embed themselves in our DNA. There's a strong relationship to the current vaccine, the way it works. But retroviruses are single-strand RNA viruses, and many of them are associated with illness. And then we are born with a set of those in our DNA, and we acquire more of those as we go through life. And a couple of triggers I have shown. The science here suggests that herpes type 6, which many of you have, is one of the fatigue viruses, can trigger the activation of the retroviruses that you're born with, that your system has managed to keep silent. The leading treatment for HHV6 is garlic. And then we know there is a huge link with Epstein-Barr, with a couple of other viruses that we discussed last time, and each one of them has a simple way of silencing them that I suggested to you. And if you forgot, you can review the video. And so then there is a huge, strong link to autoimmune diseases. And why autoimmune diseases? Well, first of all, I did my thesis on autoimmune diseases in 1975. So that was quite early on when most people barely knew how to spell that word. And so there's a huge suggestion in the literature that most, if not all, autoimmune diseases are ultimately triggered by retroviruses. And so it's a huge field, an important field. And so these are some things we discussed last time. So in MS, you can take the spinal fluid from an MS patient, and you will find retroviruses in there. In ALS, it's been suggested that it may be a retroviral illness. There's also a suggestion that prions are involved and one triggering the other. ME, the new word for chronic fatigue, there's a huge link to retroviruses. And we went through the list last time, with chronic fatigue, non-Hodgkin lymphoma, cancer, prostate cancer, especially multiple sclerosis, breast cancer. There's a huge number of articles on breast cancer. And we always thought in the past, it's mostly linked to Epstein-Barr, but it seems to be that Epstein-Barr triggers the transcription of the endogenous retroviruses, and then all hell breaks loose. And so they're helping each other. And then there was the uncomfortable literature that the American milk supply is completely contaminated with the particular retrovirus that is found in 37% of breast cancer cases and may be the real cause of it. And this is including, unfortunately, also my favorite foods like yogurt or cheese, because these things survive. I'm very, very good at surviving pretty much everything. Okay, herpes, diabetes type 1, very, very strong link. And we've had a couple of cases, of early onset in children, diabetes type 1, that we could turn back around by simply putting the kids on our antiretroviral regime, which we will go over. And maybe it's the right place for me to say that retroviruses, just like COVID-19 and many of the other viruses, are entirely 100% cleared through the liver. So the liver is scanning the blood, extracting the viruses from it, processing them, shoving them out on the other end, and the bile ducts in the colon, and then out. Now, the reason many of you get stuck with chronic Epstein-Barr, chronic herpes type 6, CMV, chronic COVID, some of you, is because the liver is not able to do that rapidly. So whether it's a backlog, whether it's a stuck situation in the liver and in the biliary system. And to get that going, we need to know the how to love your liver with gallbladder flushes, with the oil packs, with the coffee enemas, to get that system going so your liver can clear the viruses. The only way out is the way through. And so Dr. Koh will introduce you at the end of my talk here into our program, Be Prepared for You, which is a quantum leap from where we were last year. When we introduced you to the basics of the liver flush. This is sort of like adjusting the whole knowledge around it and also the procedure to the COVID-19 times. It's the single most important home procedure that we want all of our patients to do to get through this time healthily. This is beyond taking vitamin D and vitamin A and some herbs. You need to keep your liver clear. So, and Dr. J.D. Koh, who is my closest co-worker here at the Sophia Health Institute, we've been together for a long time in this work. She will be the guide. She's sort of like going to be your travel agent, your travel guide, who will take you through all this. Anyway, so we have rheumatoid arthritis linked to retroviruses, lupus, Sjogren's syndrome, hyperactivity in children and teenagers, a huge link that has been overlooked, schizophrenia, inflammatory brain diseases. Now, inflammatory brain disease is pretty much everything I've been doing over the last few years. And it was only until we saw the link and found the link to the retroviruses that suddenly we could help people that we couldn't help before. It's not just Lyme disease and it's not just EV. There is the deeper level of retroviruses that are active in all of us that we need to be aware of, we need to treat. To be able to diagnose it, and I take you through that. Okay, a huge link with autism, and this is what got my close friend at the time, Jeff Bradstreet, in deep trouble when he found that. And then there's the question, how do we become infected? So first of all is indirect evidence that the exposure to microwave from cell phone radiation currently has led to a huge activation of retrovirus in a large population, both in Europe and in North America. We discussed glyphosate and aluminum toxicity as inhibiting exactly those parts of the immune system that we need for dealing with retroviruses. We know once you activated your Epstein-Barr virus, I mentioned the article last time, a 6-minute phone call on your cell phone directly on your head will reactivate the dormant Epstein-Barr virus for a number of years. So that's pretty much all of you who are listening to this. Herpes type 6, herpes type 2 can activate it, and cytomegalovirus. Yeah. So now we get to the part, yes, okay, we are born, 8% of our DNA is retroviral material, but we can, in addition to that, get infected. The most well-known or popular infection is HIV. It's a retrovirus that you can get through sexual activity and also contaminants in other ways. But what I will be focusing on now is those of you who had the diagnosis of Lyme disease. You need to know, and we went through that last time, but this is so important for me to repeat that. You need to know that most insects that bite, that are the cause of transferring Lyme disease, not just ticks, but also spiders, fleas, even just mosquitoes, can transfer Lyme borrelia into you. But most insects that bite also have a certain load of what's called insect retroviruses in them that then either get annihilated by your immune system or they're slowly in a creepy way, slowly growing in you. Now, when you get Lyme disease, through a tick bite, because of the saliva of the tick, there's more aggressive early illness. But if you get the saliva through another insect that doesn't have the enzymes in it that the tick has, the illness may be dormant for 3-4 years or even for 20 years, and then slowly start creeping up. And what we discovered is that the patients that do not respond to disulfiram, that have a clear diagnosis of Lyme disease and that don't respond to disulfiram or other reasonable interventions, usually what's overlooked is the retroviruses that need to be treated alongside with it. And to give you this big secret away at the beginning, and the big tool that's been missing there is a gallbladder flush and the liver love, as I call it, the castor oil bags, the working with phospholipids, working with certain new things that have emerged in our field. So here's just a little bit more on the insect retroviruses, which can give you leukemia. In animal wisdom and animal science, it's known that these retroviruses are the cause of leukemia in dogs and cats. And of course, we humans are not that different from them, and so put up here, like from the literature, it can be fleas, spiders, flies, stinging flies. And here, a beautiful article that when you have a cat, the feline leukemia virus is a dreaded virus that often kills animals, and that's what they get, have vaccines for it that may or may not work. I think we're okay.
Yeah.
I think it's sort of try not to touch anything. So in this article, which is quite unique, they're basically finding out that if you have a cat and the cat strays, the flea from the cat strays to your couch and poos on your couch, that the poo contains these retroviruses, and they live for a couple of days. And so if you find yourself sitting on the couch and you're not protected, you have like your leg or your arm is touching it, you can get infected that way. It gets on your hand, you poke your face, or you, just like we do with the COVID-19 now, you rub your eyes or so, you can get infected that way. And so it's just that, I was always down on cats because of the toxoplasmosis and Bartonella, but now we have another one, is a feline leukemia that can be transferred if you have a cat. Dogs are in strange ways safer. Okay, and now we get to the uncomfortable part that I have to take you through, and it's talking about vaccines. So now I'm not a vaccine expert, but Theresa Deischer, which is shown here, is one of the world's leading geneticists. She is a researcher here in Seattle. She's published hundreds of papers. And this is a paper, Insertional Mutagenesis and Autoimmunity, Induced Disease Caused by Human Fetal and Retroviral Residual Toxins in Vaccines. I'm not going to say more because I don't want to see my head in the sling now that we have a new government. It may not be safe for us to talk about these issues, even though it's real science. So Theresa Deischer is very, very strong, and that many of the vaccines that we currently have are grown on human fetal cells, aborted fetuses. So it's kind of a form of cannibalism, injecting that in people. Some of us have concerns about that. And then the other one is that it's very well known that in many of the vaccines they find retroviral sequences of RNA. And of course, when you inject it in someone, this is probably not intentionally in the vaccines. It's depending on how they're prepared, but it is certainly one way that you can get the exogenous retroviruses, not the ones you're born with, but you get new ones that way. And then if you're unlucky, they're infiltrating your gonads, you know, whether you're male or female, and they can enter the genes that you pass on to your children. And this is really how we got the 8% to start with, is to acquiring retroviruses over the last 200,000 years. We got to 8%, but now we have new sources where we get infected during our life with new retroviruses, some of which remain in us and embed themselves. And if it's embedding yourself in the part of the genome you pass on to your offspring, they have a better chance of having lifelong problems than you've had. Okay, so I'm gonna spring now a little bit to diagnosing this thing. So unfortunately, the lab from Judy Mikovits was closed down. That was our leading laboratory to make the diagnosis of retroviruses. And so we're relying now on indirect parameters, and I want to take you through that. So the first thing that we generally see when somebody is actively transcribing retroviruses, they are immunosuppressive. And the most simple, inexpensive parameter to look at is the white blood count. You know, the white blood count, you know, the CBC costs anywhere between $2 and $5 in a decent lab. And it's the first thing. If the white count is 6,000 or 7,000, you're probably not actively transcribing retroviruses. But if your white count is 3,700, you probably are. And the second thing is, of course, the symptoms and high level of suspicion. Now, any hint that the patient has an autoimmune disease, any hint that the patient has chronic fatigue, any hint that the patient may on their track to get cancer, should raise your level of suspicion to start looking. Then the general herpes virus panel will relieve if you have EBV, HHV6, CMV, or herpes simplex type 2. Yeah, those are the 4 viruses that we know are activating your retroviruses. There's no way out. And it's enough if it's IgG. That's why I put that here. It doesn't require to be IgM positive. That's in the literature. Then there is a strange enzyme called nagalase. There's a long chemical name abbreviated into this work. And this was really Jeff Bradstreet who found the link that in autism, very often the nagalase is elevated. The normal level is under 0.65. That's where it should be. And our autistic kids is typically 1.5, 2, 2.5, or 3. It's also a marker used in cancer. But the treatment for that used to be GCMAF, the macrophage activating factor, which was the anti-retroviral treatment that was available for a number of years before Big Brother shut that down. It was followed with another product called Rerum, and now we just give chondroitin sulfate and oleic acid and vitamin D3 at the same time. You know, so that is a hint at my first hint at treatment. But then in the literature, really big is the link to CD27. I want to remind you that, so those of you in the Lyme field, you're familiar with CD57. You know, so CD57, that's a subgroup of natural killer cells that gets hit particularly hard by Borrelia burgdorferi, and the numbers go down. You know, so the normal number of CD57 should be at least over 100, over 120, and many of our Lyme patients have like values of 7 or 10 or 13. And so the equivalent of that in retrovirus is CD26. CD26 goes down when the retroviruses are active, and goes up and recover as you gain control over the retrovirus. A really, really precious parameter. It's not, the link is not 100% to the retroviruses, but in combination with the other things I'm saying here, it gives a very, very clear picture. Okay, and the last one is RANTES. RANTES is unfortunately a parameter that in the rest of the world outside the US is hugely popular because it was found, I'll show you the link in a moment, that the cavitations that we have diagnosed in a lot of our patients. These are the hollow spaces behind the wisdom tooth or where the wisdom tooth once was. Often when the extractions are done, it leaves a hole behind that's filled with, it becomes a nursery for a number of anaerobic bugs and for retroviruses. And so what Volker von Baer did in Berlin in Germany, they tested this material and looked for inflammatory cytokines that are in there and found a group, huge peak, a huge amount of a group of cytokines that are lumped together under the name RANTES. And these cytokines do anything from causing neurological disease, cancer, arthritis, autoimmune diseases, and on the list goes on forever. And so RANTES, the lab test in Germany costs 25 euros, which is about 25 bucks, depending on what day you're looking at the bank. So it's very inexpensive, and it's the least expensive marker to look at whether you have active retrovirus. So I'll show you the literature here in a moment. Yeah, so this is the CD26 article. You have to remember, you can all acquire this PowerPoint with the literature and just read up on your own. You know, so the important thing is CD26. The increase is positively correlated with the decrease in viral load. You know, so when you get the 26 up, you know you're succeeding with treatment. This is how my treatment suggestions came about. We've tried 1,000 things until we found what actually works. You know, that's my Retro-V powder. It's the gallbladder flush is huge in that, and a few other things. Bicaline. You know, there is some simple things that really I owe to Judy Mikovits, who's been my mentor in this field. You know, but just kind of know this is all of you really listening to this. Here's the article from Jeff Bradstreet, who still was hoping that he would not be murdered when he published his paper, and is very cautious, not speaking about retroviruses, but he cautiously says here that the increased nagalase activity has been associated with a variety of malignancy, immune disorders, and viral infections, and mentions HIV here. There's an HIV is elevated. And then when you read the article, you very quickly read, not even between the lines, that he's addressing the retroviruses with using nagalase as an indicator. Nagalase is very easy. You can go to LabCorp, will do that test for you. Just remember the number 0.65. It should be lower than that. Good, and we talked about the link with autism. So here is the decisive article on RANTES. Yeah? It is the marker for retroviral virulence. Yeah? And so most of the studies done on retroviruses are done on HIV for a very simple reason. That's the only retrovirus you can get funding for. Yeah? When you want to propose a study and look at the retroviruses in vaccines, you're more likely to lose your job, not to mention that you won't get any funding for it. And so it's a difficult political area, and we're pretty sure that the retroviruses are found in not all vaccines, but in many vaccines are not intentionally in there. It's a byproduct of how they're produced. And of course, with the new vaccines that are coming our way, we're concerned. Okay, so this is just one of the papers that was published on my work from several physicians that use autonomic response testing. And so some of you know I use autonomic response testing to at least get into the general idea, okay, we need to look at retroviruses, we need to do some lab work. Those of you who have taken my courses in IRT know how we use IRT to rein in the possibilities and come up, no, we need to test for Lyme disease, we need to test for retroviruses. So we also published this paper. By using ART, we could localize, this is pretty much the article is done on Lyme disease, not on retroviruses, but we could, with ART, localize in the body where Bartonella henselae is and where Babesia is and where Borrelia is, and can predict that, and then use ultrasound in those areas, vibrate the cells, and then collect the urine. And we could show in this article that's published that we have a high correlation with what we find in ART, what we will find in the urine doing PCR testing. And I was able to use my technique in a German laboratory specializing in retroviruses and do the same with the retroviruses, that I could pretty much predict who has activity, excessive activity of these viruses, and where they are, and how to chase them out of the tissues. So here's the one case that was published in this publication in the American Journal of Immunology. 25-year-old woman with POTS, severe fatigue, brain fog. She was put through all the tests on Lyme disease, were all negative, the IgNX and the IgG, IgM, everything negative. But then with ART, she was not negative. We tested several areas in the body, did ultrasound, then collected the urine for 6 hours in the PCR test, and it showed exactly the bugs that we predicted. Why do I show this here? Well, I haven't come to the retroviral thing just by trusting other people or listening to the paranoid edge of our medical websites. I came to it by actually having testing material that we can use in ART and finding it a relevant issue in probably 80% of our patients, and then by including treatment, but then backing up the diagnosis to start with, but then including treatment, having far better treatment results. And I hope there's enough practitioners listening to my talk here that we can expect you to get curious and at least come on board with us. I have a question. I forgot to take my, oh yeah, I see the watch up there. Okay, so we got about 20 minutes.
It's
Cool.
okay, Dietrich, I'll let you know.
Okay, so now we get to the treatment part. Yeah, how do we treat when the retrovirus are activated? And so so let me so there's a couple of stages of diagnosis. First of all, this is suspicion. If some patient has an autoimmune disease, has chronic fatigue, has a diagnosis of Lyme disease or other insect-borne illness or cancer, that should put you on a high level of suspicion. Now, when the retroviruses are active, you know from HIV, right? So get HIV, people don't die of HIV, they die of because HIV causes this particular immune suppression, and then you get the bacterial pneumonia, you get fungal infections, you get all this other stuff, parasites, all that, and because your doors are now wide open. And it's the same with many or most of the other retroviruses, that the expression of the illness is not typical for the retroviruses, it's typical for the secondary infections that we find. If you have a patient who reports to you that they have repeated problems with parasites and they can't get rid of them, or they have repeated problems with mold and they can't get rid of it, or their Lyme disease keeps coming back and keeps coming back, you should suspect from here on that there is an underlying retroviral activity that you haven't had your eyes on. And so I take you a little bit through the things that we do that have worked. So there's a company in England, Key Science, that has a powder called Retro-V powder. The main ingredient is baicalin extract. So baicalin, the Lake Baikal is a Russian, very, very famous historical huge lake. And the laboratory there discovered the ingredient in the skullcap root, which is the herb that is a precursor of that. And the study here is from Frank Rossetti. He's the main guy from 1993. This is in the early, well, post-early early HIV days, but it's still early HIV days. And so what happened with the HIV research, that very early on, many of us were frustrated with HIV because many of our old tricks didn't work. But the Chinese, being as smart as they are, as smart as Dr. Ko is here, have very, very early on isolated that there were certain herbs in the Chinese pharmacopoeia that were actually quite effective for HIV to stop it from progressing. And amongst those herbs, the most effective was Glutathione, which is in English named skullcap. And then they looked at what it is in there that is actually so effective against HIV. It's this thing called Bicalene. Bicalene is now very, very popular in functional medicine because it deactivates activated glia in the brain. So with brain inflammation, it's a fantastic tool. And there's actually no excuse to not put everybody on it. The Wi-Fi exposure that we all have, activates the glia in ways that's not good for us. Bicalene will ameliorate that. So two articles here, there's many, many others, but this is the two articles. So this is one of the main ingredients in the Retroviral powder. The other one is bitter melon. Those are the two key ingredients. Yeah? Bitter melon is an herb that is probably underutilized, even American herbalists I talk to are usually not familiar with bitter melon. Green tea, everybody knows the ECGC, the extracts in green tea have a huge effect. The tea polyphenols as a novel agent against the human immunodeficiency virus, against the reverse transcriptase. So to remember from my first lecture, the retroviruses, when you are infected with it, they have to enter the cells and they have to activate this enzyme, reverse transcriptase, that then takes the retrovirus and inserts it into your DNA. Green tea polyphenols block that process. And so, if I could give you just one tip, all of you should shift from drinking coffee like I do to drink green tea. But green tea has a problem with fluoride and other contaminants because it's grown in areas in India very often where the soil and the water where the tea plant is watered with is very rich in it's not just fluoride, but also arsenic has been found in there and other things, but it's mostly the fluoride issue. And so when you use a green tea, and I think we should probably make an effort here at Sophia Health Institute to find a green tea that's absolutely fluoride free. Yeah, so that's something we need to repeatedly analyze because they're always sneaking in the less expensive products from India that unfortunately naturally there's a natural high levels of fluoride in India. That's very well known. Okay, and then there's the reishi mushroom. Mushrooms have been used forever by us and others for viral infections. But here is the inhibitory effect against the proteases, one of the mechanisms that HIV and other retroviruses are using to penetrate deeper in you. Stinging nettle, I love that, because read the sentence, it's a potent and selective inhibitor of the human immunodeficiency virus and cytomegaloid replication. So we talked about CMV last time. Like one of the published things that I'm using is chlorella to squish the CMV virus, which is very often involved also with eye disease, with macular degeneration, chronic fatigue, and other things. But the stinging nettle is like probably the most ubiquitous available plant on the planet. There's almost nobody that's listening to me right now who couldn't go outside your house and go to the next little bit where there's a little bit of nature left, and you find stinging nettle there. And this is not the root, it's not the seeds, uncomplicated, it's just the leaves of the stinging nettle. Yeah, potent and selective inhibitor of HIV. And now you could argue, well, what is good for HIV? Why do you think it's also good for other retroviruses? Well, HIV is the most potent of the retroviruses. And this is our practical experience, that when you follow the literature on HIV, you usually find that the same plants have wide activity, not against all retroviruses, but each one of these has a subgroup of retroviruses that it targets. And so when this formulation was constructed, it has the widest range of treating the different groups of retroviruses that I introduced you last time. Olive leaf, most of you know more as an antiparasitic, but read this, anti-HIV activity and modulation of host cell gene expression by HIV infection. So it's not a small player. If you ever travel to Greece, you will find that all the olive trees that you see look like they've been trimmed on the bottom, and that's because the sheep and the goats in in Greece have understood that the olive leaf is their medicine. And so whenever a sheep is unwell or has diarrhea or gets parasites, they simply eat the olive tree as far as they can reach. And so you can see, like, pretty much if there's any goats around anywhere, all the olive trees are trimmed from the bottom as high as a goat can reach. It's a fantastic, olive leaf is a fantastic underrated remedy. Okay, then, sorry, we have the saffron listed here. So saffron inhibits the replication of HS3, herpes simplex virus, and HIV. Now, saffron is a bit expensive, but that makes the Retrovir powder yellow. Yeah, so it's a carotenoid, and it's more expensive than others to get it organic, but also for herpes simplex. Remember, herpes simplex, huge link with Alzheimer's disease and the current brain disorders. It's usually a combination of Borrelia, mold, and HS3-1, herpes simplex type 1 in the brain that gives you the Alzheimer's or degeneration of the brain. And saffron is a wonderful way of stopping that. I added here the lomatium root, and lomatium root is a Native American herb, more known to treat viral infections, common viral infections, and to treat especially cough-related viral infections. But lomatium root has a history in the Native American tradition. Remember, I worked in my early years in the US on the reservation, and they were all very aware of lomatium root. When the white men tried to, the first case of biological warfare was not HIV or COVID-19. It was the way the American settlers decimated the Indian population by using, when the kids had measles, the European immigrant kids had measles, they rubbed blankets around the kids and then collected the blankets and gave them to the Indian tribes. They were freezing because the white men had taken everything away from them. And then when the Indians wrapped themselves with it, they got the measles and they had no immunity against it. And it's estimated that over 90% of the Indian population was eradicated through biological warfare, not through the things that we. So it has a long history in this country. And so, but the Indians that survived, there was a subgroup that very quickly caught onto this, and they all took lomatium root, and that was the treatment for the measles. And there's something we also use for the autistic kids, that have the persistent measles after the vaccine in the gut. We use lomatium root as one of the options. There's other things, So, okay, now let's talk a little bit about whole leaf licorice. So licorice has been found to be the foremost treatment for Epstein-Barr. You know, there's a wonderful study that shows it just beats all the medical drugs and other things because of the strong link that Epstein-Barr activates the retroviruses. The company in England has decided to put the licorice in there as part of the thing. And here's just a multitude of articles, you know, of the glycyrrhizin, the antiviral effects, the treatment for HIV, again, replication of HIV is inhibited by it. There's a whole host, and it goes on and on and on. But most of the articles are on HIV and on AIDS. And here, one article that I caught my attention on ulcerative colitis. Ulcerative colitis, we always suspect that it's not just parasites and the regular microbiome that causes it, but there's a viral component in ulcerative colitis. That's not my idea, but licorice is a fantastic thing that should be attempted in that condition. Okay, and then some of you know one of my favorite treatments is Sardinian Cistus incarnus. It's a shrub that grows in Sardinia. It has a very potent essential oils in it, and very potent plant adaptogens and bioflavonoids in it that allow this plant to survive if there's, you know, it's harvested in an area where sometimes for 3-4 years there's not a single drop of rain, and this plant just thrives in the area. So this study is interesting that I have selected here for you guys. Basically, they took a group of HIV patients that failed the triple antiviral therapies that they did and put them on Cistus tea. And in every single case, the HIV retreated, you know, and they came to the conclusion that I highlighted here, that Cistus tea has broad anti-retroviral activity and no resistance has ever been found. And no retrovirus has been found to be resistant to it. So foundational therapy that we use is everybody should drink 6 to 8 cups of Cistus tea or even more every day. You know, we source that from Key Science. That's a company where the Cistus tea comes from that place in Sardinia where all the studies were related to. Yeah, so it's also known to be a fantastic treatment against Lyme disease. That's the first article here on top. The middle article here, the effects of Cistus tea on bacterial colonization, is an article that shows a fantastic biofilm breaker. Good, and then we have the broccoli sprout extract that is not in the Retrovi powder. That's a separate one. And the broccoli sprout extract is a magical tool for preventing or including in any cancer treatment that you do. It's an absolutely fantastic, surprising tool. And it treats many of the illnesses that I mentioned before that are associated with retroviruses. It's not itself known as a retroviral treatment, but it, you know, I highlighted here the sentence, upregulates genes that protect aerobic cells against oxidative stress, inflammation, and DNA damage. You know, this is basically what the retroviruses ultimately do to you, but also the electrosmog does it to you. So broccoli sprouts are a huge treatment of our time against the Wi-Fi exposure that we have, against other toxic exposure, but also indirectly helps with creating resistance towards retroviral activation. CCSVI, so I just go quickly through it, is the narrowing of the veins that drain the blood from the brain, the anterior neck veins. And we had a time about 10, 12 years ago where we had access to an MRI where I could do freely studies on people without having to pay for it. And we found that most of our people with chronic fatigue or brain fog had this narrowing in the veins here in the front of the neck. And And then we went deeper, took a deep dive in the literature, and basically these are areas in the veins where the endothelium is infected. And then we found that the key culprit in these infections are retroviruses. And then our friend, the early retroviral researcher Marco Ruggiero, developed a cream for us that is called the Sophia Flow, that has very strong anti-retroviral abilities. And then we combined it with the deep neck massage technique that I developed by combining the cream, and that we can get dramatic results and improvement in people. And that was published 2018 by Dr. Antonucci in Italy, who picked up, he's a friend, and he picked up our techniques, and he picked up the cream and published that. And then there was a review paper that I wrote in 2019. It's all in the American Journal of Immunology that shows that this actually works. We use now the circulation cream. That's a sort of, we found it actually in England. It's a cream that has basically the same ingredients, but it precedes the development by Sophia Flow by many years, and it was discovered by other researchers as being a very, very potent tool. It's simply known as circulation cream. You know, it's a deep neck massage that people have to do 2-3 times a day, and it will gradually open up these neck veins, and with that you get 1,000 improvements in neurological function. Okay, so dietary supplements, well, melatonin is the absolute big one for retroviruses and for viruses. And some of you know I tend to recommend very high doses of melatonin. Professor Ryder from the University of Houston, he runs the Journal of Pineal Research. He is known to admit that he takes 200 milligrams of melatonin every day to prevent all the cancers and work as an anti-aging tool. And so we picked that idea up, and we like to use it either as a cream or as a suppository. You don't get so much of a hangover with that you get when you take it all orally. But we like to play with that a little bit. For sleep, I still use here in the US from BioPure their sublingual melatonin. So to induce sleep, it's a little of a different thing, you know, but the high dose we use as an antiviral, as an anti-infectious, as an immune booster, as an anti-inflammatory, as an antioxidant. Yes, has multiple functions. Okay, it's nice to prepare it to combine it with vitamin E, DHEA, and melatonin. Yeah, so down here the sentence, yeah, I highlighted for you. These results suggest that supplementation with DHEA and melatonin may prevent cytokine dysregulation, lipid oxidation, and tissue vitamin E loss induced by retroviral infection. If you take the sentence backwards, you know, the reason many of you have an elevated LDL cholesterol or oxidized lipids is the retroviruses. That's the most known cause of that. Of those of you who have these resistant borderline elevated cholesterols, and when you break it down, the HDL is low, it's 37, it's not 50 or 60 like it should be, and your LDL is hugely elevated or moderately hugely elevated. That's retroviral activity unless proven otherwise. And then you want to not just do the Retrovir powder or the Bicoline, but you also want to do the vitamin E and DHEA along with it as treatment. So swallow that. For some of the practitioners amongst you must listen up, you know, because that's an issue that you have not heard before in this way. Okay, here's just the huge number of articles on melatonin for all the other uses of it, you know, as a primary thing is still antioxidant and anti-infectious agent. Here the top one is the anti-aging effect, but it's also, and this is fascinating me, the 2 articles that was found hugely effective against Ebola disease. And Some of you know that my recommendations for the acute pulmonary phase of the COVID-19 in the rest of the world outside the US, where I had a voice in this, Germany and German-speaking countries, Australia, the Gulf region or so. Many hospitals followed my advice and used high-dose melatonin when people's lungs were going down with a huge success rate. So, but it was based on these articles that you can download, from us from here. Okay, pantethine to shut down viruses that are embedded in your DNA. It's either methylation or the histone acetylation. And the histone acetylation to shut down viruses, the key missing ingredient is vitamin B5. And so we found with the retroviral infection, vitamin B5 is a miracle drug in higher doses. Glutathione, I put here the cautious use of glutathione. I know my time is up. I rush through it now. Like, just give me another 3 minutes, and then we try to keep it concise. So, glutathione can have a role in this, but we found out when people have untreated Lyme disease benefits from glutathione. It uses it to protect itself against the onslaught of whatever you're doing, and so glutathione can be a double-edged sword. NAC is the main building block for it. Is preferred if you use anything, if you use ART, test for NAC, and if it tests, then give it. Okay, a couple of papers, you can look those up when you review this material. Luteolin is a huge player. Luteolin is a bioflavonoid together with PEA. Is the bicolin, luteolin, and PEA are the three main anti-inflammatories for the brain, and you need to have a source of that. I know there's some American products. We like Glialia from Italy. The problem with luteolin is very, very poorly absorbed, and so they have to use some pharmaceutical tricks to make it absorbable. And Glialia, we found, is the best. You can get it on eBay. Okay, here the articles, on flavonoids as inhibitors of retroviral activity. You can read that up when you get there. Colonial Carver is a product I've introduced 20 years ago. It's a brown algae from the ocean that is in the Russian literature that looked at biosorption of toxins, which natural substances can work as binders in your system and extract from you the highest amount of toxic load. And it was chlorella and the Colonial Carver. They're both side to side. The Colonial Carver is more expensive. Usually I recommend chlorella, but here's an article that shows a Colonial Carver has a huge activity against HIV reverse transcriptase. Again, like the green tea, if you pair that with the Colonial Carver, it's fantastic. It's like 2 capsules 3 times a day. BioPure US is carrying it. It's also men use it to increase their male prowess. Selenium to silence retroviruses, an old hat. Selenium works like a birth control pill for many viruses, including HIV. Remember Princess Diana, before she vanished, had published under her guidance a paper recommending that everybody in Africa should receive low-dose selenium to prevent the spread of HIV, and it was like a week later she was dead. I'm sure there's no connection with that, but it's an interesting connection. Vagal nerve stimulation, we have different instruments, but also techniques. The main technique to stimulate the vagal nerve is 3 times a day for 1 minute to gargle and using different pitches of your voice. And then Dr. Mary Harris taught us the trick by actually making yourself gag by using a toothbrush and stabbing the soft palate until you start gagging. That's a huge stimulation of the vagus nerve and reset of the vagus nerve, which has a huge effect of resetting aspects of your immune system that are dysregulated. Cannabis, I'm not going to say much about it, but it has published anti-retroviral effects. And last page, yes, we can use the pharmaceuticals. There has been amazing progress in combining different aspects of antiretroviral strategies. We commonly use Truvada, that we starting dose of a quarter tablet. That's 50 milligrams of one ingredient and 75 of the other. We had a number of patients where that really pulled them out of the deep trouble that they came here for. But we prefer to work with Bicoline Retro-V powder. Retro-V powder comes from Key Science. That's the main ingredient. I use Bicoline from BioPure in addition to it. And then the Glialia, like it's popularly called. And the strategies that I mentioned here in the literature, they're very clear. And I know if you dig through the literature, you're probably going to find other things, but we wanted to have a simple, practical approach, and there's the things that I gave you in the last lecture and this lecture. That's our approach. The only missing piece is if you don't clear your liver and the biliary system, the bile ducts of the sludge that's in there, the liver cannot eliminate the retroviruses. And if they can't be eliminated, they stay active in the system doing their little evil thing, whatever tendency they have. And there's so many groups that all do, they all want to live in you and come to life in you, and they all have to do different ways of suppressing your immune system. And it's in this time with the high levels of environmental toxins and the high level of Wi-Fi radiation that we're burdened with, we can no longer afford having retroviral activity in us as an additional thing. That is something we can get control over. And it's these medicines plus the love for the liver that hopefully many of you will follow our guide on that. So the Saturday is a deeper instruction, sort of where you can then make the decision whether you come on board for the 10-day protocol, where Dr. Ko and Kim at our spa and some of us will lead you through this process that gets very practical at the end, where there's some preparatory things that you will be asked to do, some things you have to buy to be ready for it, and then you engage on this. And just remember, like, if you forget why you're doing this, you're eliminating 99% of the retroviruses that are currently bothering you, and making your system free to respond to reasonable treatments that you haven't responded to.